Well, good morning. Good morning. It's day 5 of reading through the Bible in a year. This is Hood Life, and I'm Julie Alvarez. We're going to be doing Genesis reading, Genesis 12 through Genesis 14:20. I hope you have your coffee, your tea, whatever it is that you're drinking this morning. I've got chai with a little sugar and cream. I'm kind of stuck on chai. Been stuck on chai tea and salted caramel. Mmm. This is the mug of the hour, snowman. I love my mugs. Mm. So let's get started, shall we? This begins with a narration on the call of Abram. With the life of Abram, a new chapter in the history of God's dealings with mankind begins. God's presence in Abram's life does not appear to be based upon any special uh, mer- meritorious qualities that Abram himself might possess, but simply because God chooses him as the man through whom he will bless all of mankind. Simply chosen. Abram lives at a time when, in the western part of the Fertile Crescent, the Egyptian Empire is in its golden age during the 12th dynasty. In the eastern part of the crescent, the Sumerians have controlled the area from their capital of Ur, U-R. I think it's Ur. I'm really washed out in the back there. Sorry about that. But somewhere around 1950 BC, however, the Sumerians are overthrown by the Elamites, who come from the east of the Tigris River. The Elamite invasion causes such confusion and turmoil in this once stable area that hordes of people from the Arabian desert are drawn into more fertile area. These descendants of Ham from the west, or Amorites as they are known, decisively take over the land and establish various capitals, the most notable of which is Mari on the northern Euphrates River. This Amorite culture will flourish until about 1700 BC, when it will be overrun by King Hammurabi of the Babylonians, who is remembered principally because of the code of laws which bears his name. It is this Amorite culture with which Abram is most closely associated while in Haran. However, Abram himself is a Aramean and a descendant of Shem. Although the details are sketchy, it appears that Abram belongs to a rootless, unsettled, and semi-nomadic people who wander about among more settled people in search of food and water for the flocks which they tend. As the Genesis record continues, Abram and his clan will be seen wandering throughout Canaan in this very fashion. The life of Abram, however, is more than a historical narrative about a Semitic Aramean wandering throughout Canaan. It is a life which will later be praised as an outstanding example of faith in God. With his father, Terah, now dead and himself middle-aged, Abram is called by God to leave his homeland, his tribe, and his father's family in order to journey 300 miles to a land about which he knows very little. Once Abram arrives in the land, God promises Abram that he will give the land not to Abram, but to his offspring. And this is the promised. And this is promised despite the fact that the land is already occupied by the Canaanites. Yet Abram believes God's promise and continually worships God. As the Genesis record continues, it appears that God had already called Abram at an earlier time, which other scripture indicates had taken place when Abram was still in his former homeland. But here, God reaffirms the call and covenants a sevenfold promise both to Abram and through him to all peoples of the world. That's called faith. God calls him to a promised land even though it is occupied by the Canaanites. I mean, the Bible simply says, yet Abram believes God's promise and continually worships him. And we don't, it's not recorded the little details of probably the the thoughts going through his mind. Well, the land is filled with Canaanites. How in the world how am I going to have this land? But faith, Abram believes God's promise and continually worships God. Okay, so here we pick up at Genesis 12. God's call to Abram. The Lord had said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram left, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Abram traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. Now there he went on toward the hills east of Bethel and pitched his tent. With Bethel on the west of Ai, and Ai on the east, there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. Then Abram set out and continued toward Negev. Now here's another little narration about Abram dishonoring himself in Egypt. Having seen that Abram is a man of great faith who trusted God enough to move to an unknown land, it comes as somewhat of a disappointment to learn that Abram can also be a man of great moral weakness. Isn't that true about a lot of us? This insight comes out of an incident which takes place in Egypt, where Abram will take his family because of a famine in Canaan. Even at 65 years of age, Abram's wife Sarai is less than middle-aged and still beautiful, especially in the eyes of the Egyptians, who would be attracted by Sarah's presumably fair complexion. Fearful that the Egyptian men will be attracted enough by her beauty to kill him in order to have Sarai, Abram asked Sarai to represent herself as his sister, if necessary. Sarai is in fact a half-sister to Abram, since both have the same father. But asking Sarai to join him in a deception which could result in a sacrifice of her honor is clearly an indication of weakness in Abram's character. But Abram's failure to trust God to deliver him out of any trouble that might result from his being completely truthful shows that Abram's faith is still a matter of personal struggle. Isn't that true with us? He believed God, had faith to believe God that he'd have the land that was occupied by the Canaanites, but he didn't have enough faith here to believe that, God would take care of him in this problem. Okay, now we pick up with Genesis 12:10. Now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while, because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that she was a very beautiful woman, and when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, men servants and maid servants, and camels. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. What have you done to me? He said. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way, and his wife, and everything he had. Now next is a narration about the separation of Abram and Lot. Abram had dishonored himself in Egypt, but he is not destined to remain in this valley of self-defeat and moral failure. As he and his nephew Lot came out of Egypt once again into Canaan, the renewal of Abram's moral character will become evident. When grazing land becomes scarce and trouble develops between their herdsmen, Abram is put in a position where, as the elder patriarch, he can insist on his right to whatever territory he might choose. Rather than being self-assertive, however, Abram gives Lot first choice and accepts the consequences when Lot chooses the then lush valley of the Jordan River instead of the less fertile hill country of Canaan. The solution to this conflict with Lot is not only both practical and gracious on Abram's part, but also further evidence of Abram's faith in God. He had come to this area at God's call and had been promised that his descendants would someday inherit the land. Yet despite the fact that his decision could well affect that inheritance, Abram sacrifices personal gain in favor of maintaining an important family relationship. While this incident gives reassuring insight into Abram's depth of commitment to God, it also hints of a serious character flaw in Lot, which will become more and more evident. The Genesis record begins the account of this incident as Abram and Lot bring their large clan of people, as well as herds of cattle and flocks of sheep, out of Egypt and into the Negev, or southern part of Canaan. So now we pick up again with Genesis 13:1. So Abram went up from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything he had, and Lot went with him. Abram had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had first built an altar. There Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. The quarreling arose between Abram's herdsmen and the herdsmen of Lot. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So Abram said to Lot, "Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and mine, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left." Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, toward Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, "Lift up your eyes from where you are, and look north and south, east and west. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." So Abram moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. This next narration is entitled Defeat of the Kings. With Lot settling near Sodom, a city of the Jordan plain near the Dead Sea, and Abram settling to the west in Hebron, not far south of modern Jerusalem. The Genesis record shows the transformation of Abram from a wandering Hebrew patriarch concerned mostly with finding sustenance for his people and herds into a courageous warrior. It all happens in the context of political and military turmoil in the east of Hebron, rather far removed from Abram in both distance and seeming importance. For some 12 to 15 years, a power struggle had been taking place among various kings of the East, among whom King Chedorlaomer of Elam has remained the strongest. When 5 kings in the Dead Sea region joined to oppose the Eastern Federation, Chedorlaomer gathers his 3 allies for a punitive foray into the valley of Siddim, which surrounds the Dead Sea. Not only do the kings of the Eastern Federation defeat the local kings, but they also sack Sodom and Gomorrah and take away the inhabitants of those cities. Among the hostages are Abram's nephew Lot and his family, who by this time have taken up residence in Sodom. When word of Lot's capture reaches Abram, he responds quickly and unselfishly by gathering a small force of men and setting out to rescue his captive relatives. Daring to challenge a much larger force of trained soldiers, Abram and his men execute a surprise attack during the night, completely routing the enemy and liberating Lot and his family. As Abram is returning from this exciting venture, he is met and welcomed by King Melchizedek of Salem, probably the ancient name of the city known today as Jerusalem. When Melchizedek pays honor to Abram's heroism by feeding Abram and his men, Abram responds by giving Melchizedek a tenth of all they are carrying. This act will be more fully explained by subsequent text, but suffice it to say now that Abram recognizes Melchizedek not only as a king, but also as a priest in the service of the same true and living God which Abram himself worships. The Genesis record begins now with the background leading to Abram's dramatic rescue of Lot. Okay, we're picking up at Genesis 14:1. At this time, Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goim, went to war against Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Sinab, king of Adam, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zor. All these latter kings joined forces in the valley of Siddim, the Salt Sea. For 12 years, they had been subject to Chedorlaomer, but in the 13th year, they rebelled. In the 14th year, Chedorlaomer and the kings allied with him went out and defeated the Rephaites in Ashtaroth, Carnium, and Zuzites in Ham, the Emites in Shaveh Kiriathaim, and the Horites in the hill country of Seir, as far as El Paran near the desert. Then they turned back and went to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and they conquered the whole territory of the Amalekites, as well as the Amorites, who were living in Hazazon Tamar. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zor, marched out and drew up their battle lines in the valley of Siddim against Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goim, Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some of the men fell into them, and the rest fled to the hills. The 4 kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food. Then they went away. They also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, since he was living in Sodom. One who had escaped came and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. Now Abram was living near the great trees of Mamre the Amorite, a brother of Eshcol and Aner, all of whom were allied with Abram. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out to the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan. During the night Abram divided his men to attack them, and he routed them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. He recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions, together with the women and the other people. After Abram returns from defeating Chedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is, the king's valley. The king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the people, and keep the goods for yourself." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have raised my hand to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and have taken an oath that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the thong of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, 'I made Abram rich.' I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten, and the share that belongs to the men who went with me, to Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them have their share." Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Then Abram gave him a tenth of everything. So that finishes it up for today. Thank you very much for joining me here on Mahood Life. I'm Julie, and you guys have a blessed day today.